So I'm Kevin Nilson, Technical Solution Engineer at Google. I run a small team there where we actually help partners. So we help people like HBO, Hulu, Netflix, Pandora, all the usual suspects who have content on the television are the people that I help. And we're starting to get into other things that you wouldn't normally think of on the television, possibly like recently, I think a few weeks ago, we launched Daily Burn, which is like a workout thing, so you can work out in your living room. So there's lots of neat stuff coming along. So I'm the team lead. There's a few of us, and we end up helping the partners, possibly writing their apps for them. So next week I'll actually be in New York, helping some folks out there. Cool. So this is about me. I'm a Java champion. Do lots of Java stuff over the many years. 3-time Java 1 rock star. Wrote a book, Web 2.0 Fundamentals, with Oswald, who's going to speak sometime later today. I saw him. I'm probably most known for the groups I run. So I started the first Google developer group. I run the JavaScript meetup. What else? The Java user group. And recently I've started doing DevOps for Kids, which is sort of, my son here in the front row is getting a little older, a little bit more interested. And we run workshops that teach kids about coding. So if you do have a kid, check out DevOps for Kids. Or if you know someone who might be interested, that's a great place. Cool. So what are we going to talk about today? So we're going to talk about Chromecast and the Cast SDK and Google Cast. And we'll talk about some, just general tips for coding for the TV, no matter which platform, Roku or Xbox or Apple TV or Chromecast. Some general kind of guidance there. And then we'll start diving into more Chromecast-specific things, talking about the developer console, writing receivers, which is the code that runs on your television, senders from Chrome, and then we'll talk about samples and debugging and some of the design checklist stuff that we have. All right, so what is Chromecast? So Chromecast is a small dongle. I think I have one here. Yeah. So this is what the Chromecast is. You can think of it, it's HDMI, plugs into your television, and it's kind of like a small Chrome browser, basically, that you're plugging into your television. You can think of it like a Blu-ray player, something that you'd plug into your television. Works similar kind of concepts. It works on any HD television. It's super low power, so it has the USB on the back that you can plug directly into your television, like they're showing here, or you can plug it into the wall, whatever you prefer. I like to plug it into the wall, but it's everybody has their own preference there. Supports CEC, so basically, if you're watching your Comcast or whatever, your regular cable, and then you cast something from your phone, it will, on mini TVs, it will flip the input to the input of the Chromecast. It doesn't work on all TVs. That's a standard that's not implemented so well across the world, like many standards, but often it does work. And what's really nice is it's super cheap. So it's only $35, and that's what you get. And actually, it's $30 everywhere, but I guess it's kind of guaranteed to be $35. So it's super popular. It's been the bestseller on Amazon for over 200 days, pretty much since it launched. So it's and you're competing with things like Kindle that are only sold kind of in that place. So it's doing really, really well for the top electronic. So what is Google Cast, right? So we talked about Chromecast being this piece of hardware, right? But that's more just a piece of hardware that implements Google Cast. So Google Cast is the technology. So when you write software, either for Android or iOS or for the web that are for Chromecast, it's all Google Cast. And then it can be played on one of the devices, which is the Chromecast. We recently launched the Android TV, the first model of that, and you can also cast to that. And you can envision in the future this technology being built into televisions or possibly automobiles or whatever it is. Anything, could be built into this projector, and I just cast up to the projector to send that content out. So we have the sender, which is basically your iPhone or your Android or your desktop Chrome browser. Those are the senders. And then the receiver is the code that actually runs in your television, right? So that runs on the dongle. It's an HTML5, sort of, you can think of it like a single-page web app in a lot of cases. And things like the video is often done with like a video tag or an audio tag on a, done full page, full screen with CSS. Finally, casting is basically sending content up to television. So any questions on that? No, it shouldn't be. So what is it? These are the senders like we talked about before, Chrome, Android, and iOS. And then the receiver is the Chromecast device, and that's HTML5. And it's actually Chrome running there. So you get all the nice features. So Google Cast is a little bit different than things that use, Apple TV or Roku or things like that, where it kind of mines together this super immersive experience that you get at the 17-inch. You're really good at using your phone. I would much prefer to use my phone than a remote control, right? Where you've got this lean back 10-foot experience where you're sitting relaxed, looking up at a screen, and you can do that comfortably. You can do it shared with others, and it kind of brings these two things together. And so the idea is, as you're using an app on your phone, you can imagine you're on the train, coming home, you're watching a movie, you come into the room, you want to share it with the rest of your family, or you want to finish the viewing on a larger screen, you just click the cast icon and it goes up on the television. So it kind of brings these two worlds together. And then if you want to change what's playing or change the volume, things like that, you actually use the app in your phone. So think you're using HBO Go, and you're using the HBO Go app to cast to the television, you're actually using the HBO Go app rather than your remote control. So how does it work? Just like this, you can imagine you're on your Android phone, you're watching YouTube, you're streaming it directly from the cloud. You look up and you see your television, you say, wow, I'd really, would much rather watch it on this much larger screen. You remember, oh yeah, I've got a Chromecast. Maybe I can do that. You look down at your phone and you see the cast icon. And at that point, you'll click the cast icon where your phone connects to the Chromecast, connects to your television. And from that point, the Chromecast itself connects out to YouTube, and it streams directly from YouTube. So you notice it's not, it's not coming through your phone or anything like that. So that it saves battery, things like that. The YouTube shows up on your television. And then if you'd like, you can actually put your phone in your pocket, background it, you're completely saving, battery, and your television is streaming directly from YouTube. If you have kids like I do, you can send it to the TV, you can leave and go do something and let the television babysit your kids, whatever it is you'd like. And then later, when you decide you want to change a video or change the volume or whatever it is, you get your phone back up, it automatically connects to the television, opens the socket there, and then you can make those changes that you'd like. And you can disappear. So it's a really nice experience in the way it works. And it's not limited to a single user. Multiple users can connect to the same television at the same time. So why would you cast enable your app? Americans spend an unbelievable amount of time in front of the television. It's a really huge, 5+ hours every day. And that's a combination of television viewing and gameplay, right? And a few weeks ago at Google I/O, we announced a lot of the work that's been done around gameplay on Chromecast. So soon you should see a lot of game apps that are cast enabled very soon. So what can you cast? This is the list of kind of what's out there as of a few months ago. So it's a real small set of things. HBO Go, Netflix, Hulu. So I think there's a good, opportunity for folks for being one of the first kind of apps out there. So, now's the time to jump on it. But this is the discoverability in the Play Store. So like I said before, the apps that you're casting are just the normal app. It's the normal YouTube app, the normal Netflix app, the normal HBO app. You don't need a separate app that's like HBO for Netflix. You don't need anything like that. Cool. So here's some general tips for the television. And this is a sample because of my travels and because of last minute notice, I was not able to flip the slide to say, hello, open webcam, but that's okay. You'll forgive me. So here's an example of a simple receiver. So this is the code running in the dongle in the Chromecast. And it has this simple HTML. It says hello HTML5 devconf. But then when I look at it on my television, so this is my old cube where I used to sit, that's what I see. So does anyone know why? Yeah. So we had at least 2 people who said Overscan, right? So the idea is basically there's kind of margins around the side that due to older televisions wrapping and older standards and things like that, you actually shouldn't use that area. So that's kind of what's happening here. Another thing I'll point out is that Chromecast defaults the background to black. Even though I said the background should be black, it defaults to black. So you basically should set your color to white. Otherwise, if you just try to throw some messages up there, you're not going to be able to read them because it's going to be black text on a black background. So here's some information about Overscan, and this is just off of Wikipedia. You can see the kind of margins for the 4x3 and the 16x9. And that's kind of exactly what if I flip back to the previous slide, that's kind of exactly what you're seeing. Where this is my television that I use at work for development that we bought for me to use in its default out-of-the-box setting. So that's what happens. So make sure that you center text or anything that the user really has to see. Make sure that it's out of these margins. And then, all the producers of content, they know that. And so when they film movies or TV show episodes, things like that, they make sure that the characters' faces and things like that are not on those outside where they chop off parts of their face. So interaction, this is kind of fun. So, I've got another little one, 21-month-old, and sometimes he tries to touch our television. So this is not him, but he doesn't do it because I yell too much now. But he definitely, we have lots of fingerprints on the television. So the interaction model is like how I said before, where you're actually using your phone for doing things and not the television. And what's different about it, some people sometimes have trouble to understand this, where when you're making changes, when you're interacting, you should be looking at your phone. Not like a remote where I look at the TV and I press things. Actually look at your phone and you get all the nice functionality the iOS and Android give you for doing that. And then no dialogues, things like that. So you can't just take your existing kind of web page for viewing videos and throw it up on the television. It doesn't work so well for that. So like I said before, the device is your remote. So people know how to use it, quick and easy to set up. There's usually no learning curve because they're already using those apps, right? So here's another thing, is burn-in, right? So is anyone familiar with this kind of concept? I mean, definitely with old computer screens, but in modern televisions, does anyone know where this is like a huge problem? And it's a problem in airports, yeah. What? Yeah, plasma screens. So plasma screens are super bad about burn-in. So where you have to watch that is if someone pauses on Chromecast and you freeze that screen, you need to, after 5 minutes, you need to take it back to a splash screen, and then your kind of splash screens need to rotate through, stuff like that. Yeah. So does anyone know how long they should wait or not wait for plasma screens, people to get angry? Yeah?
Yeah, but don't the new plasmas have technology where they can move the pixel a little bit somehow?
Yeah, they call it jitter, right? Yeah. So some of them do, yeah. Yeah, but still, not everybody has them, and you don't want people's screens. It actually looks a lot worse on my screen than it does up here through the projector, but I guess this is like a flight that was always late here or something. I don't know. Delayed, right? That's, yeah. But yeah, there's definitely newer LCD screens, things like that don't really have any problem, and the plasmas, the new ones, it's constantly shifting to try to prevent. But yeah, at 5 minutes, supposedly burn-in begins. So it's something you totally have to be aware of, even splash screens that have your logo, making sure that's flipping around and moving or resizing and all kinds of things that you have to do. So now let's jump into Chromecast and kind of where you'd get started if you wanted to build something. Sort of a nice starting point is a developer console that we have. You can go in there, create your own apps, register your dongles, your Chromecast devices, and do all the things that you need to do there. How does it work? We have a few different types of receivers, custom and styled. The custom is basically you write all the JavaScript yourself, you write the HTML, the CSS, and you write everything yourself, and you have full control. And I'll tell you that basically every featured partner that we have, HBO, Hulu, Netflix, all these kind of people, that's what they do, right? That's what they do. They want full control. They want to be able to do all kinds of super interesting things, or things related to DRM and content protection, things like that. The styled receiver is really nice for folks who they want an experience that feels like it's built for them, but they don't really want to write code to do it. And so all you do is define some CSS, and you can customize things and make things look really nice, like it was built for you. But it's a sort of a very generalized player that will play content and allows you to customize it with CSS. So this is the styled receiver. You can take a default styling, or you can pass in a custom styling. And this is kind of what it would look like. Here you can see some of the CSS classes. You define a splash class, and that would be what shows on the splash screen. Watermark, progress bar, so that you could change the color of the progress bar to match the theme of your company. So you just define a few CSS classes, and things just magically look really nice. The next thing to talk about is dongles. So what you want to do is register your device so that basically it gives you the ability to debug things on your device, but not everyone in the world can debug. And it also lets you propagate your app out there in the Play Store, in the App Store, before you're ready to publish. So when you're ready to launch and you think you're good to go, the devices that are registered here will be able to see your app, but no one in the world will. So it lets you deal with that 3-day propagation delay around the world in the App Store and things like that. And then this is an overview of just from my screenshot where I have a bunch of apps. Some are published and some are unpublished, and I can remove those. And then I have a bunch of devices that are ready to be used that I use for testing. So you'd put all your QA team, all your developers, things like that in that area. So let's start now and talk about the receiver. Whoops. So the receiver is what runs in the dongle. It's what's running in your television. It's actually a Chrome browser in there. So it's like a single tab Chrome browser that's running. Supports all the nice web technologies that we're used to, HTML5, JavaScript, CSS. And then we've got support with EME, right, for doing encryption, things like that. And we use MSE, the media source extension. So basically, it's using all the optimized things inside of Chrome for playing the videos. Works out really, really nice, and support for web audio. And what's nice about that, because it is Chrome, you can use all the Chrome developer tools with Chromecast that you're very familiar with. You can do breakpoints, you get all the Chrome dev tools, and I'll show some of that here in a bit. So the receiver, we talked about previously the styled and the custom receiver. There's another one called the default receiver where you don't have to do anything. You don't even have to go into the console. You don't have to register. You don't have to do anything. You can just use this, and you get that for free. There's constants in the libraries, and you can say, my app ID is this constant, right? And kind of stepping back, why do you need an app ID? Basically, we'll show in the code here in a little bit, where when you decide you'd like to launch a cast application, when you're in your app, think HBO Go or Netflix or Hulu or YouTube, and you click the cast icon, you tell the television, please launch this app ID. And that app ID gets decoded into what URL is your receiver at that runs in the television. So here's a super, super basic custom receiver. It's almost like the least amount of lines that you can do to run a custom receiver. So let's go through this so you can understand a little bit. You start by defining the receiver.js file, right? So this is the code that runs in the television. And then you'll create a single video tag in the page, right? And that's where it would show your actual content. And then when the window loads, or when the browser's ready and up and running, you go ahead and look up that video tag, your media element. And then from there, you'll create a media manager. And so this is within Chromecast. It's the manager that deals with all the media events, and tell it where your video tag is. And then you'll get an instance of the receiver manager and call start. And that's all you have to do. Once you do this, if people use the media control channels, they can play videos, they can pause them, they can do everything. And this is all that it takes. But you can add additional callbacks, tell me when a sender has joined, tell me when a sender's left, when a phone's connected or disconnected. You can tell me when video's loading. All those events are there as well, and you can get all that data. But this is the least kind of how you'd write that code. Another thing I want to talk about is messaging, right? So in the receiver, there's two types of messaging bus, or there's two types of messaging. You have a messaging bus, and then you have channels. So the messaging bus is more broadcast. It's sent to all the connected devices. So you can imagine we're all sitting here and we're all playing a game, right? Imagine we're all playing poker against each other, right? For the face-up cards, I would show them on the television and I would broadcast those out to everyone with a messaging bus. But you all would have your own private hand, sort of your face-down cards. And those I would send to you on a cast channel so that it only goes to you. It's more of a point-to-point communication rather than a broadcast. Now let's talk about the sender. So the sender, as we know, is the code that's in either Android, iOS, or in the web. And since this is a web conference, I'm just going to talk about the web stuff. But afterwards, I'd be glad to talk to you about any of the others. So my focus actually at Google for a long time was in the iOS space, which people find interesting that like all I did was iOS for about 6 months when I worked on Chromecast at the beginning. So that's probably where I'm the strongest, but in general, that's like the platform I know the least about, but that's where I know the most about Chromecast. So what is the sender? Like I said, it's the browser, and much of the work is actually done in a Chrome extension. So we have a Chromecast Chrome extension and all the code about connecting and things like that. Instead of including, a JS file that has all kinds of code in it that you have to download, it's actually already there in the Chrome extension. So HTML5, we talked about that. And all you need to do is just include this one JS file. So now let's go through kind of how you get started and how you do that. So you start when the window loads, and you first get the the load event happening. You need to check if Google Cast, if that object exists, and if there is a cast device available. So what does this mean? So basically, the Chrome extension itself adds window.chrome.cast, sets that object, defines it on your window object. And so basically, you're checking, do I have the cast extension installed? That's really what that means. Then the next piece is you'd want to know, is there a Chromecast on my network? Because if there isn't a Chromecast on your network, we don't show the cast icon, because we don't want people to, what is this? They get frustrated, I want to cast, I can't. So the cast icon would only show. And so this is how you actually do that check. It's sort of the first thing you do to get things up and running. What's that? Oh, yeah, what he said is that should be an and, which is how I presented it. Make sure that you have the object and you have devices on your network, and it clearly says or. I'll fix that another day, or maybe I'll leave it in there. It's like I'll give the next guy who finds it a Chromecast. You get a Kleenex, yeah. Sorry. Next time. So the next thing you want to do is create a session request, and this is basically where you're initializing everything. You send it your app ID, so you want to create a session for your app. So you want to create a session for HBO, or you want to create a session for Netflix or Hulu, whoever you are, whatever your app is, and that's your custom app ID. And then you'll create an API config with that session request, and then you add listeners, so it knows who do I tell that I successfully joined, who do I tell when people have joined, when senders have come and gone and things like that. And then you'll call initialize, and then that initialize, you pass it that configuration, and then additional callbacks for when it was successful and when it failed. This is a little bit about being able to check for receivers, knowing if you have devices. This is another way, and it's kind of a weird listener that actually returns a string with the string available, and so that's how that works. So that gives you that information as well. And then here, this is actually how you launch receivers, right? So you'll request a session, right? I would like to start a Chromecast session, and then this is just an inline function here for having updates and errors, right? So did people, sessions start or end and things like that. But when you call this, what happens is the Chrome extension gives you a list of receivers, right? So this is I've requested, hey, I'd like to start a session, and then this is my callback that I'd like you to call this update listener to let me know if that was successful. And what happens is here, when I requested the session, it pops down from the Chrome extension up there, it pops down this list of devices that you have, your living room or whatever it is, all the devices on your network, and then you can select one of those. And once one of those is selected, then you're at the point where you're able to start playing movies and things like that. So the next step will be to start defining metadata about the movie that you'd like to play or the media. So here you can pass in the URL and the MIME type. So we know, is this an image, is this a video, whatever it is. And then you'll create a load request. So load is it's kind of like play the video. This is a video I'd like to load. And then usually there's an autoplay, true, false that you can say. But typically it's like load it and play it. This is typically what, I don't know of anyone who doesn't do autoplay, who's in the regular movie stuff. And then here's finally on your session, you'll load it, and you have callbacks for when it succeeded and when it failed. So disconnection is actually done. You don't have to deal with any of that. It's all done through the Chrome extension. So the Chrome extension itself, you pull down. You can see this, here where they say stop casting. This is Looks like I'm playing something with no title there, but that's kind of the idea of how it works. So much in the web center is handled through the extension. It's kind of out of your way, but it does have some drawbacks. So if I go back here, like I can't style this and things like that at this point in time because it all comes through the extension. All right. So now since John's very accessibility focused, I thought I'd throw in some closed caption stuff, make John happy, make all of us happy. It's good stuff. So actually this week, we launched a whole bunch of closed captioning enhancements, but I shouldn't have had that extra burrito, so it's kind of fun. I don't know if we're having those for lunch or not, but I apologize if we are. Hopefully this doesn't happen to you. So the functionality, so we've had support for closed captioning since the beginning, WebTT and stuff like that. That you can all support. You can define closed captions where they're at on the screen. You can style them. You can do all that. But it required quite a bit of heavy lifting on anyone who wanted to do that. Now what we released this week is full support so that it takes the native phone's configuration. You can, in your phone, you can say, this is the closed captioning that I like when I watch videos on my phone, and then it just inherits those, and whoever casts the video, it inherits those in the television and uses those there. So then that's without adding anything whatsoever. So that would define color schemes and font sizes and fonts and all that is all kind of just automatically brought out there for you. So cool. So now let's talk about samples. So you want to kind of jump in and start doing things. So all the samples are on GitHub, github.com, Google Cast. A whole lot of great stuff out there. The top one there is Cast Videos, which is designed to be sort of a fully functional app to be similar to something that you would write and put out there in the App Store, the Play Store, Chrome Web Store, whatever. A very, very complicated app, and then it's across all the platforms, and they all work well together, so you can start casting on Android and then pick up your iPhone and change and pause, and they all work together really well. And then we've got two others that are more Hello World. So it's like a Hello World video. What's the least amount of code to get a video playing on the television? So you can start to understand the life cycle. And so that's a really good place to begin. And then we have an possibly even simpler one, or maybe not, maybe it's more difficult, is a Hello Text, which is how to get text up on the screen. And what that's all about is custom data channels. So instead of, all the video stuff goes over common media control channels for sending media, but the text stuff, you can define your own channels. You can send JSON packets back and forth or string packets back and forth, and that's how you would do things like games, if you want to implement poker, if we all want to watch a movie and we all rate it while we watch it, and at the end of the movie it tells us who rated it the highest or something like that. Some app like that would be kind of fun. This is what the Cast Videos reference app looks like. We've got a real extensive design checklist that I'll talk about pretty soon here, that basically, we want every Cast app to behave the same so that when a user goes in, they know exactly what to expect. It feels like a Cast app. It feels, very native and comfortable, and they don't have a big learning curve for your app. So that's one of the things that this does. It kind of does everything right in that regards. Where the other Hello World ones, all the code to do things right is gone. It's just helping you kind of get things understood. Implements lock screen, notifications, things like that. So that if you lock your phone, you can still pause it from the lock screen. You have notifications that you're casting to kind of be able to pull you right back into where you were before. And then here you can see a mini player. It's a little blurry on this, but it basically tells you what is playing so that you can navigate back in from wherever you're at. So debugging. We kind of briefly mentioned this earlier. So one of the things, if you do want to debug the code in the television, the first thing that you have to do is check a box here that says send my serial number over when I'm, connecting. Because what happens is when things communicate, they do it in a very anonymous way for your privacy. But because of that, we're not able to say, oh, this is a developer device. Please, give them access to do developer things on this account. So you need to check the box to not be anonymous so that it can be, not necessarily be tracked, but so that it can be identified as a developer device. You may need to reboot. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I think today you don't actually have to, but you used to have to, so I just tell people, just reboot it and that's a much safer thing to do. And then one thing to call out, which was in one of my earlier slides, but I didn't mention it, is when you are making changes in the console, not here, but in the console, it does have the configurations that you make on the server are cached for 6 hours on the dongle. So when you make changes, rather than wait 6 hours, just wait 5 minutes and reboot the dongle, and it will repull the configuration. But it does require like a 5 minute for it to get through to propagate around the world to all the servers. So debugging. So to debug your receiver, you can do Chrome remote debugging with ADB. So has anyone done that before? No? Nobody's used ADB to remote debug Chrome? So let me tell you why you want to. Forget about Chromecast. If you write websites and you want to test, you have a bug that only happens on your Android phone, you can use ADB, which is Android debug, I think. Android developers, I don't know, whatever. You just type ADB connect and then the IP address of your phone and it connects. And then you can use your desktop Chrome DevTools to connect to the browser here and set breakpoints here, and you can fix, you get your console on your desktop browser debugging the website on your phone. So it's super, super awesome. Even if you're not doing Chromecast, you should totally check it out. Yeah?
What's that tool again?
Are you talking about ADB? So ADB is, if I USB connect my phone, I would do ADB connect and then the IP address of the phone. And that kind of opens the socket between the two. And then you open up Chrome desktop. And for Chromecast, you go to port 9222. That's the default. The IP address 9222. And then Chrome just starts up a session where you're debugging your actual Chromecast or your phone.
So you can use your laptop
to set breakpoints and everything.
and see what's happening.
Yep, on the phone. So it's super, super powerful tool for when you have all these bugs that, scrolling performance is slow on Android in Chrome. That's a great way to do it. Some things to point out here for debugging stuff. On your receiver, set the max in activity to a really big number. So does anyone have any ideas why we would do this? Anyone? Any iOS folks in here? It's very iOS specific. So basically, we have a heartbeat that happens between the phone and the television, and it's sort of polling, are you still connected? Are you still connected? And if it doesn't answer, then we think it's left the room. And so basically, iOS is very single-threaded in nature. So if you set a breakpoint in iOS, it doesn't have the notion of services like they have in Android or any sort of background daemon. And so what happens is when you stop on a breakpoint, if you stop on a breakpoint for more than 10 seconds, it'll close your session and everything you were trying to do gets killed. So just normally that's an optional parameter that you shouldn't pass in, but if you pass it in with a big number, it allows you to debug much easier without losing sessions. And then because, like I said, for the receiver debugging, it is just a Chrome browser, so all the you can put debugger statements for manual debug. Have people used debugger statement, the last point there? You guys are familiar with that? It's like a forced breakpoint in your code. So when Chrome gets to it, it'll pause right on that. Console log, all the stuff there. Then another thing, the receiver does cache sometimes. So sometimes you want to flip your images. You can do window.reload and pass true, window location reload true. But personally, it's actually faster just to power cycle it. So, so this does like a clean shutdown. I power cycle and it's faster, so that's what I do. So I set up my environment where my USB is on my Chromecast is connected to my monitor, so I can get to it really easily. On the sender, same idea, right? It's just Chrome, so you get all the Chrome dev tools for doing that. Cool. So now let's talk about the design checklist, right? So we have a really extensive design checklist that tells you exactly how you should build a cast app. And one of the things at Google that we don't do is we don't typically review apps and then tell you you can put this in the store, you can't put this in the store. You know, if you think like the Android Play Store, everything can go out there, but we publish a huge design guidelines of how we'd like you to do things. So my recommendation to you, either for building a cast app or building an Android app, is to absolutely treat this like it's required and like you absolutely must do it. And the reason I tell you is sort of a tip and trick. A lot of people say, ask me, my app is so great, so many downloads, and it's always been #1, but it never gets featured by Google. And they always ask me, well, how can I get featured by Google? And I say, have you read the design guideline? And they say, no, we don't like that. Well, that's why you don't get featured by Google. We want our app to be different. Well, Google's trying to build an ecosystem where all the users feel comfortable. You can push things a little bit, but really you need to feel like native apps. They want everything to be the same. Where Apple would reject you and tell you, come back again later after you've made things be compliant, we let you launch with non-compliant things, but you'll never be featured. So just a tip for everybody is treat this stuff super, super seriously, because you never know when your app would be selected for some sort of featuring. And this, not following this stuff would definitely make you not get featured. And then I guess more importantly, it would make your users feel confused, why is this app behaving not like all the featured apps? So this is some of the examples of what you get where it tells you the behavior of how the cast icon, when there's not devices on the network, versus when there are but you're not connected, versus when it's connecting, it has a nice animation effect, and then when you're connected. And then it goes through things like, here where we've got a yellow state, that's because the theme is yellow. But if your app is, I work with Red Bull TV, and I help them a bunch, and the Red Bull guys made theirs red, obviously, right? Here's some more stuff where you can see various, the details where it has call-outs and tells you how to do various things. So useful links if you want to go out there and kind of get started. The first one, developers.google.com/cast. That's the website where you can kind of find all the information. You'll find a little YouTube video from me on the iOS sender in there. Lots of good stuff. And then the samples are all on GitHub. Feel free to fork them. Feel free to do pull requests. Feel free to make feature requests for the samples, not the SDK. Out there, a lot of good samples out there. There's samples of how to do closed captioning, samples of how to do DRM, all kinds of good stuff out there. The next one is the developer portal. That's where you register your app, and you can publish and unpublish. Design checklist. That's what I talked about. You can go out there, figure out how to write your cast app. And that's actually a really good place to start. So if you're just getting started and you want to kind of start writing code, or you want to start designing your app, if you read through that design checklist, you kind of understand how cast works really well and what are all the edge cases that you're going to have to handle. And the final thing that we have is the Google Cast developer community. So this is a G+ community where you can share with other developers, sort of what you're doing. you know, it's a really great place to go to learn. People asking questions, they're getting answered, things like that. It's a really nice community. So how to begin? Go out there, get the sample apps, get them up and running. Read the documentation, senders or receivers, run the sample apps, and then you can modify the sample apps to put your streams in there. So take your content that you have and see if it'll play in our sample apps. And if it plays in our sample apps, then read the design checklist and get up and running. And with that, many thanks to everybody for coming out on a Saturday morning. So, yeah. Cool.